Hello everyone and welcome to our webinar. Today, we're going to be covering Eggplant Performance for JMeter. Eggplant Performance for JMeter was released as a part of our open source communities initiative. This product will help communities accelerate test automation and be able to keep up with the pace of DevOps even better than before. So Eggplant Performance for JMeter is a fully functional version of Eggplant's load testing solution that can be used with JMeter test plans. Eggplant Performance adds strong test composition, environment management, dynamic control, and result analytics to JMeter's existing scripting capability. Tom Mazur, technical specialist here at Eggplant, will be diving into the nuances and functionality of this newly released product. And now, over to Tom.
Thank you, Lexi, and thank you all for joining us today and showing interest in Eggplant Performance. So let's get straight to the key question. What on earth is Eggplant Performance for JMeter? Well, by now you probably know that it is a completely free version of Eggplant Performance, but what does that actually mean? So that's basically what I'm going to be showing you today. But before I get too carried away, it's worth taking a step back and having a look at JMeter itself. So I have JMeter installed on my desktop here, and instead of going through and creating what's known as a test plan in here inside JMeter, I'm just going to use one I created earlier called My Test Plan. It's pretty basic. There's not a lot going on. If you're familiar with JMeter, you'll probably recognize all of these different test elements. Basically, it was a test plan that was generated from using JMeter's recording functionality, and this is pretty much what you end up with. I might have made a few changes here or there to name these transactions into something meaningful. So you can see that the script is basically going to browse to the home page, click login, submit the login, and then do a logout. So it's very basic, not much going on. If it's a very complicated bit of automation that you're doing, this tree is obviously going to be a lot bigger and, to be perfectly honest, quite unwieldy in some situations, depending on what you're testing. These days, there's quite a lot of HTTP traffic going on behind the scenes when you're interacting with most websites, and that can quickly make this list pretty difficult to make sense out of unless you've written it yourself and you spent many hours working on that. Were you to pick up someone else's test plan, you might have a slight heart attack. So it's not the most pleasant user interface to deal with, in my opinion. In fact, JMeter itself recommends that you don't even use this GUI mode when you're running your test proper. So when you're actually running this at scale, and that's presumably because it requires a certain amount of memory. The user interface is inextricably linked to the actual process that's doing the automation, and so if anything, if you have any kind of memory issues in the automation or something goes wrong with the automation, the GUI will crash, or perhaps the other way around as well. So it's not a very nice situation. It doesn't really bode well, so to speak. So, but anyway, we'll see why that comes into play later when we actually run this in Eggplant Performance. So yeah, like I said, there's not too much going on here. We've just got 4 transactions, and we'll see how that translates when we do the import. So that's really the key thing. Eggplant Performance, we have since version 8 added the ability to import a test plan from JMeter. So here we have Eggplant Performance Studio. So this is the main component of Eggplant Performance, where you spent most of your time designing your tests that you want to run. And so right now there's not much going on in this particular workspace, as it's called. So the workspace contains one or more projects, and the projects is where your scripts actually reside. Workspace contains typically elements that can be shared across multiple projects, so you don't have to recreate them. So for example, your injector definitions, they'll be there. If you have any servers that you're monitoring as part of your tests, they'll also exist there in case you want to test the same servers in different projects. But most importantly, and for the purpose of this webinar, obviously, we have this JMeter test plans folder, which is where we'll be able to import our JMX file. So there is already one here, but I'm just going to repeat the process just to demonstrate how easy it is to do this. So here we go. Here's my test plan. I just double click it, and it now tells me that the test plan has been copied into the workspace. I can see it there now, so that's good. Important to note is that it actually copies the test plan. So this is now a test plan that exists within the workspace, which is a physical folder on your machine. So it doesn't actually modify the original. But in any case, the test plan has appeared here. And like many of the items that you see in Studio, you can right click them and you'll be given options, and those options will basically take you on to the next step in a lot of these cases. So the obvious one is to create a test, but you may even want to open this test plan in JMeter from just from this menu instead of using the JMeter shortcut. And you could also obviously remove the test plan, but we want to create a test from this test plan. And so obviously this is now a Eggplant Performance test. I'm just going to give the test a name. I'm pretty happy with that, so I'll just go ahead and click OK. Now that puts the test inside the project. That's where the tests belong that you're going to run. So we see, if you're familiar with Eggplant Performance, you may have noticed since version 8 that we've added this extra tab here, which is for that shows you your JMeter test plans essentially. So we've pulled out a bit of information from the test plan. We've got one thread group in there, so the equivalent in Eggplant Performance is a virtual user group, and we have a total of 50 threads or users or virtual users. So that's basically what was in the test plan. If I go back to JMeter, it might not have been obvious, but if I select the thread group node or test element here, you'll see that the number of threads are 50, and we've also got our ramp up duration defined here, and we're looping for 50 iterations essentially. So we're going to repeat with each user all of these requests 50 times each. So that's pretty basic, not much going on there. That's basically it. So, and we're also going to be running this from the localhost injector. So this is actually quite key. Straight away, you might see that we're able to run this from multiple injectors at the same time. So we're using the same functionality that's available in Eggplant Performance already in order to distribute the load. And unless I'm mistaken, I'm by no means a JMeter expert. I believe it's a bit tricky to actually set up injectors with JMeter and collect all the results afterwards. We take care of a lot of that for you, so you don't have to manage that manually, essentially. So that's our test plan created here. You can add more test plans to this test as well, and they could be different test plans, so you can actually combine running different test plans as part of a single test from Eggplant Performance as well. But for now, I'm just going to leave it as this one test. So now that we have our test here, again, right-clicking the test node brings up this context menu that gives me the next step, which is, in this case, open test in test controller. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. And that'll load test controller, obviously, which is the second component of the trio, basically. So in Eggplant Performance, we have the studio, the test controller, and once this test is finished, we'll move on to the third and final component, which is analyzer, where you'll be able to see the results of the tests that you've completed. So, but for now, let's just press the big green play button here. Now, it does actually say here that I haven't built the project here. So there's some source code in my project that I hadn't actually built. It's actually in a different project, so I'd forgotten about that, but it's as simple as just hitting the compile button there. So it was actually checking to see whether or not I'd done that. Should be happy with it now. My project is up to date, so this is good, and I'm all set to go. Basically, all of my pre-test checks have passed, and it says here that JMeter has been configured correctly as well. So I'm expecting to just be able to run this without any issues. So let's see if that's actually the case. Okay, there we go. It started up. So this is the test controller live dashboard. So this is something that is quite missing in in my opinion from JMeter. So there really isn't much in the way of test feedback. Like I said earlier, you can't really see, or you're not recommended to use the GUI mode when you're running your load test at scale. And so obviously this is a significant improvement over nothing. So what some of the things you can do in the test controller UI is move some of these dialogues around. Let's bring up some transaction summary data there. So the whole UI is very flexible. You can drag things around to get them to display how you like, and these display settings are stored against that test, so you only need to really configure it once per test. Straight away we can see we've got our virtual users ramping up pretty quickly. We can see some HTTP response codes coming back at the rates that we see on the y-axis here. We've got a failure apparently in the click login step, so that's interesting. We can also see various information about average response times, minimum and maximum response times, and what kind of transaction rates we're executing at, and how many times in total we've executed each transaction. So we've already done quite a lot in a very short amount of time, just a couple of minutes, and we've already done over 600 transactions. So that's it's flying away. I've even got this injector status area here where I can see the utilization of my local system as this test is running. So I'm around about 30%. It does include the webinar software, so it's not only JMeter that is causing that load, or test controller for that matter. But this is the basic dashboard, the default dashboard. But if we look on the left-hand side here in the tree view, there's actually quite a lot more information available that we can bring onto the display. We can pick and choose whichever information we want. So here's an example of the virtual users table, and that gives a bit more information about each of the different threads or virtual users that are running. We can see how many iterations they've executed, whether or not they're still running, what their current transaction is, if there's been any errors. We can even delve deeper. If we see an error, we can just right click and open event log, perhaps even just bring this into a new window. And this is then the lowest level detail that you can find with JMeter, at least. So we can see that actually that's not quite true. I take that back. The virtual user event log does give you quite a lot of information. If you ever write messages out, at least in Eggplant Performance scripts, you would see those messages appear here. But you do see your errors appear here, and we can see that I got a non-HTTP response code for our little demo website here, so it's a bit unexpected, but it's good to know that obviously that happened. What we also have is the ability to show the weblog. So the weblog is a key component of Eggplant Performance with web scripts. The ability to see the underlying HTTP request and response data is very key, particularly when debugging, when you're initially wanting to get a script running. Looking at or comparing the requests that were sent in the recording with what you're sending in the replay, as well as the responses, is ultimately what allows you to get your scripts working, to have them do what they're meant to be doing. So we can see all sorts of data, depending on what the request actually was sending. So I can see our email address here. The response is a 302 in this case. It's redirecting to the main URL here. So there's just a lot of information here that's quite useful to have an overview of what your virtual users are actually executing. We can add more charts as well. So we have the transaction response time chart. That's obviously useful to see. We can also line these up a bit better. So you have virtual user concurrency down there. Probably not too interested in the response code rate. Basically, this is a level of freedom that is probably not something most JMeter users are familiar with. You can really customize pretty much everything. So you can even add custom metrics if you're recording your own metrics that might not fit into any of these default charts. Then you can have those be plotted as well. It's all very useful. So it's just a basic test. I'm just going to leave that running for now. It'll run for probably another 10 minutes or so, or perhaps even less. In the meantime, I'll go back to Studio and show another project that I've got set up that has a little bit more going on. Okay, so now these folders are populated. We've got some Eggplant Performance assets here. So we've got a data source. It's just a CSV file with some usernames and passwords. I've got a recording that was created using our own Eggplant Performance proxy recorder, and from that recording generated these scripts. So this looks more like a typical Eggplant Performance project. I've also got this test plan here. This test, sorry, it's pretty much the same as the other test in the previous project, except that I've also included monitoring. So I had a monitoring target defined here. It's a Windows server, and so it has perfmon available on it. So I'm pulling these perfmon statistics from the machine, and they'll all be available to look at whilst I'm running the test as well. And I've also defined some KPIs, so key performance indicators. I've named my KPI collection as service level agreements, which is typically what KPIs are. I've got 3 different KPIs. One is the obvious transaction response time KPI, so I want my response times to remain below 2 seconds average, or I will consider the test to have failed. I also want errors to be below 50, and another cool thing is you can actually define KPIs for the servers that you're monitoring as well. So I'm expecting the CPU usage to remain below 80% if I want this test to be, or that KPI to have passed. So I'm actually not going to run that test. What I wanted to do was show some previous test results in Analyzer. So this is the Analyzer component. It's the last of the 3 components where I've actually run some tests with this JMeter test plan, and that means I will also have the KPI results available here. So this is typically what you end up with. So in this case, the CPU usage was basically reached 100%, so that's the only KPI that's actually failed. My other KPIs were within acceptable limits. Transaction summary, again, is very similar to the one you saw in Test Controller. In this case, I've actually linked a number of charts together so that they're displayed on the same x-axis. The transaction response times, transactions per second, and virtual users concurrency. So you can see the ramp up, how that changes the number of transactions per second, which is obviously expected, but it's also increased response times as well. You can see the ramp down too. So there's quite a lot of information to see here. We've got the system under test metrics as well. I can see CPU and memory usage. Network statistics are available there as well. And so all of these charts are generated based off of chart templates, and these are pretty much all of the built-in ones. Depending on what perfmon counters you're bringing in, will also create those templates for those charts as well automatically. Those chart templates then get combined into an analysis template. So we have a default template that generates these charts. Default web adds this web folder. If you're doing any kind of web testing, then you would typically select that. And I've also got a customized one that also includes a system under test metrics for my NopCommerce server. And so once you've got your results in here, you can also generate a report. So I'll go ahead and create a report from this, and we'll have a look at what that looks like when that's finished generating. Let's see if I can find it on my system. Let's see if it's here. There we go. And this is what the generated report looks like. So again, the KPIs are listed right at the very top by default. We've got the transaction summary here again. The HTML report, we do support other formats as well, but the HTML report generates this nice little side menu that has anchor links that take you to the various different parts of this report. So yeah, this is basically all of the functionality that you would gain if you were to use Eggplant Performance to run your JMeter tests. However, you would also gain access to our own web virtual user. So with the free edition license, you would be able to run up to 50 web virtual users. And so there's actually a few different reasons why you might want to do that. And so I'll quickly just go over what those are. So if you are wanting to use a web virtual user, you would benefit from using our own recording functionality that's built into the tool. From a recording, you can generate scripts in C# or Java. So of course that doesn't mean that there is code, but what's important to note is that we have something called generation rules that allow you to apply logic to the scripts through a series of wizards. So actually there's not that much need to look at the code. If I'm being perfectly honest, I would rather be working in code than an interface where it is all just screens and pointing and clicking. Eventually you will get to a point where you need to write some code in order to handle some, something that might be, that basically wouldn't be possible to do unless you have that capability. JMeter, itself has the ability to write little Java snippets. I think it's called JSR or something along those lines. So that's basically an admission that sometimes there's just no way to get something done than by writing code. And so but as I was saying with these generation rules, the really common things that you want to do with a script, things like verifications. I've just got the list here now. So these are all the generation rules in the tool. You might want to verify that a particular response contains some phrase, so that you can then decide what to do next. Should the virtual user continue running, or should they log a warning or something like that? You can also perform correlation and define the rules for correlation through a series of wizards. So in case you're not familiar, correlation is when there's a dynamic value coming from the server. That value gets hard-coded into the script, but you need to actually modify the script so that instead that it uses this the server sent value during replay. And so that's your script will probably not work unless you do that correlation, and so it's very important to get right, and it can be quite tricky, but the wizard in the tool does make it a lot easier to do to implement that. There's also various replace rules for replacing hard-coded email addresses or login credentials, for example, with values that are instead fetched from a data source. that's a compelling reason. Another compelling reason to use our own web virtual user and these generation rules is that they actually travel along with what we call the custom virtual user. So I've got this custom virtual user called knobcommerce VU. Knobcommerce was a site I was testing. If I define rules, they're stored against this virtual user, and so what that basically means is I might when the version of my application or website changes, I can quickly create another recording that captures all of those changes, and instead of copying and pasting from the previous version of the script to the new one, I can automatically apply all of the generation rules to that new version of the script. So that can save a lot of time, especially in very agile, continuous integration environments where the code can change very frequently. And so, yeah, it can definitely save a lot of time. There's also a few other things that we do for convenience sake with the recording. When you create a new recording, we'll automatically modify the system proxy settings. We'll have a list of browsers that you can select from, and we'll launch them in private mode or in incognito mode. So that ensures that you appear to the server as a completely new user with no cookies or cache, and so that's best practice for creating scripts. So basically, we've been working with web technologies for quite a long time. We'd like to think we have a solution with our web virtual user that might appeal to you as a JMeter user as well. That's more or less time up for me. I hope you enjoyed this overview of the Eggplant Performance for JMeter functionality and an overview of the tool. And it's now back to Lexi. Thank you.
Thank you so much for all that, Tom. I think that was really informative for our audience. And thank you to everyone who joined us here today. I really hope you all learned a lot. But if there's anything more that you would like to ask about or speak with someone here at Eggplant, please visit us at eggplant.io and you can very easily get in touch. Thank you so much and looking forward to seeing you at the next event.